Save the Semantics, episode 245. It is February 9th, 2024. My name is Myra. This is the podcast where I ramble on for a bit about some shit. I am recording this on my birthday because I wanted to. I haven't found the time to put out anything in a long while. So yeah, I kind of wanted to just hop on and give a kind of a quick catch up on things. This is probably going to be a short one. I'm going to try to record something like a second half of this over the weekend, because I think I'll have some additional things that I want to talk about later on. But for today, I'm going to probably try to keep it brief. But there are some things that I wanted to talk about, quite a bit to catch up on. Let's talk NBA trade deadline, because that just recently passed yesterday. Let's just kind of briefly go over that. Pretty uneventful across the board. On the Warriors side of things, the only thing that they did was trade Corey Joseph, which I don't have any qualms with, but no significant moves, no significant roster changes. That honestly all happened pretty well before the trade deadline, most notably like the OG Anunoby trade, and then the Siakam trade, of course. So those are kind of already off the table. Yesterday, really the only thing that kind of was like what I feel is the most significant was just the Knicks getting better. They got Bojan Bogdanovic and Alex Burks from the Pistons, just continuing to ramp up their roster and the strengths of their roster and that sort of thing. So good for them. A lot of people are kind of putting the Knicks high on their list of teams that could be competitors in the postseason, so that's something to kind of look forward to. They do have a pretty well-rounded roster. I feel like they're probably one of the strongest rosters on the team, maybe outside of like the Celtics, I guess, but Knicks, I think, arguably have more depth. Maybe they don't have this, maybe they're not as top-heavy, but they still have, they have a very strong team just overall. So I think they pose quite a bit of a threat in the East, following their moves. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of pans out. Other than that, it's been really small changes here and there, small roster moves, but no stars. DeJounte Murray didn't get traded. Nobody from the Bulls got traded, which I know has been pretty heavily scrutinized by some Bulls fans, which I completely understand, right? Just continuing to stay in the middle of the road. Like, they have performed well in the last few weeks, but I obviously, just considering everything, it seems like they are very directionless. They're not focusing on building younger talent, but instead just continuing to retain their current team and be middle of the road for like the fourth year in a row, right? Just continuing to stay mid. Sort of reminds me of what the Wizards were doing before they blew it up last year, with Beal and like John Wall, that era. Paul Pierce was there for like a year or two, where they were like just continuing to be in the playoffs, like in the 8th seed. I think the highest they got were like the 6th or 7th seed, I believe, but they were never they never really had a chance to compete further than that. So that kind of direction reminds me, the directionless. I mean, I guess you could argue that the direction is to stay just so so close to the middle that people will still come watch you, because there's like, oh, maybe there's a potential they can make a run, but it's like, what's really the likelihood of that? If they do end up getting into the playoffs, it's like, okay, they'll either get swept or maybe a little squeak out one game against like the Celtics or like the Bucks or whatever, or the Knicks, or the Cavs. All of those teams are significantly better than the Bulls, right? So I think it's difficult to see that. But hey, man, if they get into the playoffs, it's like, oh, you got more excitement in a sense, right? But it's just not. There's no real strong foundation to build off of, right? So, yeah, we'll see. I don't know. It's kind of a weird place to be. Talking about the Warriors a little bit. Again, no real changes. I think obviously there was a lot of talk in regards to like Wiggins or potentially even Clay getting traded. None of that happened. So we are simply going to move forward with what we have. Same roster pretty much as last year in a very similar sense. They did pull off a win against the Pacers yesterday, a very strong win. They also have had a very nice road trip. I think they went 4-1, right? I haven't really been super on top of watching games recently. I watched like the second half of the Pacers game yesterday. But that's like good news. I think really the goal at this point is to somehow kind of get into the playoffs as a lower seed, compete most likely through the play-in, and kind of eke into that. Because like I think once you can very much argue that once we get into the playoffs, like teams will not want to match up with the Warriors. Like that's just kind of the case. Like I don't think any of the top, aside from probably like Denver, I don't think teams like Minnesota or Oklahoma City, despite how much they've killed us during the regular season, I still don't think those teams would want to face the Warriors in 7-game playoff series, man. Kind of a similar situation to the Kings last year, right? So there's always a potential there. I still don't envision like a long, a long playoff run for this team, but they could still make it potentially competitive. You know what I mean? I still, there is a potential for there to be somewhat of a turnaround in this sort of, quote unquote second half of the season following the All-Star break. But I don't know. I'm cautiously optimistic. Just based off the play, from recently, their recent wins, but I'm still kind of cautious about their trajectory. So yeah, that's kind of the catch up on basketball stuff. There is quite a. If I really want to dig into the details of trades and teams and all that shit, I could, but I don't really want to right now. We'll keep it. We'll kind of keep that brief. So next week, it has been kind of heavily rumored that there will be a Switch or, a Nintendo Direct coming up. There's been the rumor mill continues to churn out stuff regarding, the Switch 2, the potential that it might be, releasing in March, that sort of thing. That's pretty exciting stuff right there. We'll see what kind of, we'll see what the Direct is going to be like. Cause like, I think it's almost like, it's almost like a given at this point. And like looking at the track record from the last few years, it's very, I think it's like comfortable to guess that there will be one right now, sort of like beginning of February, cause that's been, consistent. 2 years ago, Xenoblade 3 was released on my birthday. One of a very, very fond memory of that. So maybe something similar will kind of pop up, come on, as sort of like a belated gift for me in terms of, an unexpected release or announcement. That would be kind of fun to see. I'm not gonna hold my breath or anything, but it would be cool. What else? That's kind of a lot. That's kind of like some of the news stuff that I wanted to catch up on. The Super Bowl is this weekend. I'm going to be kind of busy this weekend, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to record anything. I'm going to shoot for maybe Monday, honestly. I'm leaning towards Monday to record something just because I think that would also kind of give me a little more time to reflect on some stuff. Maybe I want to talk about the Super Bowl and shit, that could be something. So maybe I'll save kind of the second half of this, kind of week's episode for then. For my birthday, I kind of got myself a couple of things. I got myself Baten Kaitos 1 and 2, the remaster for the Switch. And then I also got Final Fantasy X and X-2 remastered for the Switch. Both of those were on sale. I was able to use some of my points that I kind of stored up, and I was able to get them for both of those games for like a good deal. So I'm thinking after I beat Disco Elysium, it's possible I might take a break or something, but I'm very keen into diving into Baten Kaitos first, just because that's kind of been, catching my attention a lot more. I've been thinking about, getting into that game. Excited to check out, Monolith Soft's earlier titles. I have a good feeling, just based on listening to like the music and just kind of the critical acclaim that it's received. I'm very excited to get into it. I'm also very intrigued with like the battle system of the game, which involves like, it's like cards. It's like a turn-based combat system using like cards. And I kind of like that. I feel I like that quite a bit. Because, recently in the last couple of years, I've talked about Slay the Spire quite a lot. That's become one of my favorite games. And then more recently I played Monster Train, which has been a really fun card game. Not quite to the same level as Slay the Spire, but still pretty fun nonetheless. So I'm interested in seeing kind of how the game handles combat with like cards and dealing cards and that sort of thing. So that could be fun, because I don't think I've really, outside of like the two essential like roguelike games, I haven't really experienced it with a more traditional JRPG, so it'll be kind of interesting to see how they handle that. So yeah, that's exciting. And then of course Final Fantasy X. I've played the very first section of the game a long time ago on the PS2, but I've never continued forward from that point. So this will really be my first time playing the game with a really concentrated effort on making progress and that sort of thing. So I'm very, of course, I'm looking forward to it. I've heard great things about Final Fantasy X. It being one of some people's favorite game in this whole series. So I'm very intrigued and interested to dive into that, because I've heard many things about the game, and I have a vague idea of kind of what it is, but I really don't know a whole lot else. I know, of course, like Tidus and Yuna and some of the characters, but I don't know the story all that well. I still, I only played like an hour of it a very long time ago, and I was very confused in terms of what the hell was happening. So when I pick it up, I think it'll be exciting to dive into it and see what it's all about. I want to talk more Disco Elysium. I have a lot of thoughts on the game, but I want to spend more time kind of delving into that, because I have a lot of thoughts, and it is a very interesting game that I would like to discuss. So I'm going to save my thoughts. I'm going to save some more commentary on that I'm probably gonna have more things to talk about after this weekend, so stay tuned for that. All right, it is now February 12th, 2024. Recording this on a Monday. Catching up on some things from this weekend. Had a lot of stuff going on. It was nice. I had a really good weekend overall. I had sort of like a belated kind of birthday gift to myself, where I went to a concert. I went to see Mick Jenkins, first time, and it was a good time. And I was happy that I was able to catch it. I felt sort of like almost late, in terms of recognizing that he was going to be coming in my area. And I was like, oh shit, I gotta grab those tickets, man. I was like on it. Kind of immediately bought them when I found out that he was on tour. So, happy that it kind of worked out there. Super Bowl was yesterday. The Niners ended up losing, but it was still a really fun game. I had a nice time. Went over to a friend's place, had a little get-together party there. So that was good. It was nice. Overall, a really solid weekend. This morning, I woke up. This morning in general, I just sort of was like, I was not in it, man. I don't know what it was. It was the most stereotypical Monday kind of attitude that I've had for a minute, and it was just like, it was really annoying. It was just one of those instances where I felt like I slept okay, but I also just was not in. I was just not in great spirits to start off this week, because I was coming off just sort of like a, kind of a sort of a mini kind of birthday weekend of sorts. So I was not looking forward to coming back, but I feel better now. I feel a little better now. I just had to kind of get over that feeling, I guess. But yeah, today, this kind of this week, I guess I want to try to remedy starting off on the wrong foot, because overall, like I'm doing okay, with work stuff and everything. So I feel like I shouldn't be super down on myself. I feel like I'm in a decent position in terms of everything. So I think I can just kind of, one, just sort of continue to get good sleep and everything, and not. I guess not oversleep, because I think I did oversleep a little bit too. It's either if I oversleep or if I undersleep, I tend to be in like a bad attitude. I've talked about this plenty of times. I think it is more often than not that I find myself oversleeping. Like when I undersleep, I honestly feel less tired than I do. Like if I slept like 9 hours or 10 hours as opposed to like 6 hours, which is kind of weird. A little frustrating, but it is what it is. It's like you would think that getting more sleep would be more like technically more beneficial, but no, it's not usually the case. So yeah, that's kind of that. This upcoming week we got All-Star Weekend coming up. I've talked about this before. I talked about this last year. I haven't really been super invested in All-Star Weekend since maybe I was a kid. I think a lot of the festivities surrounding kind of this period of time is it feels more geared towards kids and that sort of thing, and I got a lot of enjoyment out of it when I was younger, watching pretty much every single day. But I'm not as I just don't care so much for the events anymore. I'll just check up on the highlights because they're it's just like a whole 1 day thing. And I remember I used to watch it just like all the way through, like all the way from beginning to end, like starting from like Friday when they did like the Rising Stars, or it used to be like rookies versus sophomores, and that sort of thing. But I just don't have the patience or time for it anymore. So I'll check up on highlights. Maybe I'll tune in for the All-Star game. I don't know. I haven't watched the All-Star game really, honestly, that much. in a long time, just because the quality of the game is not really like, who really watches it, you know. So that's that. What else? What other news? I think there is sort of this sense, and I think, like post All-Star break, I feel there is going to be kind of this ramp up towards the postseason, towards the playoffs, and that's pretty exciting. There definitely feels there's kind of a little bit of pressure building up in terms of determining seeding and getting into playoff position and whatnot. In terms of like the Warriors have been doing really well. I touched upon this on Friday when I recorded, and I was able to catch the game they had against the Suns on Saturday, where Curry hit a game-winning three, which was awesome. I'm really happy I was able to catch the tail end of that game. It was a really good game. So momentum is in their favor, with kind of the reemergence of Draymond back into the lineup. I think that definitely helps a lot. I think it seems that we've sort of ironed out some of the kinks that we might have had. I mean, it's been a nice like 6-game stretch, so it's not, it's not definitive, but hoping that this is like a sign of, kind of a turnaround and the ability to get into to secure like an actual playoff position as opposed to a play-in position. I still think that just based on how strong the West is, I think it's more likely that they would get into a play-in position, more likely like the 9 and 10 seed, because 1 through 8 is already, 1 through 4 is sort of, there's starting to be a separation between like the 4th and 5th seed, where it's like right now I think it's like Timberwolves, Thunder, Nuggets, and Clippers, I think, right, that are the top 4. Like it seems like there's like a pretty good, there's like a 5-game break in between 4 and 5. So unless one of the other teams below that, like the Suns or like the Pelicans or Mavericks, or who else is in that group, one of those teams suddenly goes on some crazy 10-game run, it's a little hard for me to see them catching up to those top 4 seeds, but anything is possible, right? There's still plenty of games left in the season, but that's kind of there's a bit of that separation right now. So what's kind of remaining from 5 through 10 rather, is a bit more kind of up in the air. So I think that leaves for more, potential for, teams to kind of move around and stuff. Like any game can move you from like 5th to 8th seed. Like just one loss can really hinder your positioning, and I think that's really key. So it's going to be very interesting seeing how the rest of the season goes. I'm excited to kind of see that. So like regardless, of course I would want to see my Warriors be in playoff contention again, but I still think that there's a lot of exciting things that are kind of going on, at least in the Western Conference side of things. In the East, it's a bit more. I feel like it's maybe a bit more solidified in terms of playoff seeding and whatnot. Like the top, Boston's obviously is kind of the clear favorite right now. But then there's like 3 through like 4, where it's like not exactly fully established yet, and then kind of the remaining teams, it's a bit more. There's a bit more clear lines drawn in the Eastern Conference this year, and as opposed to the Western Conference too. So I think that it's a little easier to sort of like determine which teams are going to be where, in for playoff / play-in positioning. So yeah, that's kind of it on the basketball side of things. On sort of the sports side of things, I've been it's been a good weekend. I've also been able to catch up and make a lot of progress on Disco Elysium. I mentioned that I kind of wanted to talk more in depth about that game. I feel I'm nearing the end of the game. I don't know how much more time is like necessarily left to go, but I think it's possible that I might be able to beat it tonight, or potentially, within the next, this week for sure. Uh, but maybe tonight or tomorrow. Who knows? If I really kind of stick to like the main story and whatnot, I think it's possible that I might be able to beat it. Um, I have a lot of thoughts on the game. I think it's very difficult to comment on stuff like, sort of the politics and the sort of the societal aspects of the game that the game is like commenting on, because it's very descriptive. It goes into a lot of detail, and a lot of the stuff that that's being talked about. I think a lot of that is going over my head, to be completely honest. I'm sure that if I maybe like studied some things, if I studied, you know, history a little bit more in depth, or if I had a bit more of a knowledge on just kind of general, I don't know, some concepts of like philosophy and whatnot, I think there's a lot to really derive from that. And I'm sure that someone who is much more educated on those kinds of things can probably pinpoint to references that are made throughout the game that directly reference like real world, like Earth history, you know what I mean? Human history. And so there is kind of that. There's this game is far deeper than kind of the surface level observations that I'm giving it for. Because I just don't, I lack the depth of information to be able to talk about a lot of the things that are brought up in this game. Of course, like it very much touches on concepts of like capitalism and like communism and whatnot, and how how those ideas sort of prevail throughout society and whatnot, and how these kinds of concepts are flawed, and how they affect people just existing in this world, and how how you argue that how it affects people existing in the real world and whatnot. So I think that I have like a general again surface level understanding of what the game is sort of critiquing and whatnot, and the ideas that's kind of bringing forth. I just don't have the I don't think I have enough to go in depth with those concepts with this game. What I do want to kind of talk about, I think, are a bit more related to the like the characters in this game, how they survive in this world, and how they sort of cope dealing with this very fractured and very unstable world. I think these are things that I would like to maybe talk about a little bit more, because I have a better sense, of what the game is trying to say in regards to the characters and whatnot. With the main character in particular, I think it's very interesting. Before we get into that, actually, it's really funny. I was, and I forgot if I brought this up before, but I was talking to like a coworker. We were just talking about like games, games that we were playing and stuff. And I mentioned that I was playing this game, Disco Elysium, and he asked me what kind of game this was, and I explained, I explained that this was sort of I was like, yeah, this game is like a single player game. It's like kind of similar to Baldur's Gate. And to be fair, there are elements of this game that are very much, dice rolling, you essentially roll for initiative and that kind of thing. Like there is that element in play with this game. but it is just a little disingenuous to maybe compare it to Baldur's Gate. I think like maybe like stylistically because of like the isometric view, maybe you could argue that a little bit, but these are just two completely different games. Other than just the element of like randomness and the kind of that aspect of character building at the very beginning, but I would argue, I'm gonna argue that it's not super relevant to this particular story. Like other than those things, these are very very different games. So, yeah, don't expect coming into this game for this to be like Baldur's Gate because these are not at all the same type of game. In regards to kind of like main character, I mentioned that at the very beginning of the game, you are sort of able to quote unquote build this character out to allocate their stats in a particular way. Maybe you want to focus on strength, like physical strength and endurance, or you could focus more on kind of the mental aspect of it, or the mental characteristics of a character, and put your stats more towards that, or you could have more of like a balanced build, which I sort of had. Ultimately, in regards to the main story itself, how you build out your character doesn't necessarily matter too much. How you progress through the game and how, in terms of how much time you spend dealing with certain things, like say if you need to use your strength to like open up a door or whatever, there are certain roadblocks in place that you might need to find a different solution to get to that point. But I think with in regards to the main character and his relation to like the overall plot of the story, I don't think it really matters. The way I look at it with your main character, the one you control, I like to look at it in the sense that he already existed before you assigned stats to him. He already had a role in this world. You come into the game at a point where he essentially loses his memories, and so part of the mystery is that you're trying to regain his memories while solving this murder case, kind of at the same time. But this person, this character, this main character who you control, it's not you. You yourself, you can't necessarily put yourself into this character in the same way that you can, like say like Baldur's Gate, right? Baldur's Gate, you create your own character, right? That's what that's my understanding of it, right? But in this game, no, you don't, because this character already existed in this world before you decided to kind of put yourself into their shoes. So the decisions that they've made have already sort of built who they are as a person. You know what I mean? They talk about sort of this. There's a lot of elements of, you kind of your character discovering who they are through these conversations that they're having, picking up pieces of information about the world. It's like certain things, if they pick up like a piece of like gum wrapper, it like reminds them of their past. Like the scent brings them back to a certain point in their life before. And so when you slowly kind of uncover these details about this character, you learn that they're already a certain type of way. They're already a person of their own. So regardless of the decisions that you make, you can choose to kind of be like a jackass and like do stupid things, like get drunk and get high and like try to solve cases in that way. But that's a part of his character too already. You know what I mean? These are already things that he's done. there are parts of him that are like empathetic. Sure, you could try to play the role of being an empathetic person. Um, but these are all aspects of who this character are, right? So I imagine if you like try to do sort of like 100% run, if you want to call it that, where you fully build out this character to their full stats, like you're just uncovering everything about this person, right? It's not like you're building this character up. You're just recovering things about them that you as the player didn't know. So I think that's a very interesting approach that they took with this game. And I like that because it gives the character their own like agency. Like it's not someone who it's like sure you have the choice. Like there are a lot of decisions that you can make, but they are all in some way, shape, or form in line with how your character would act, right? Um, you could potentially be like, I want to play the role of someone who is, who you want to be just like a good person. You don't want to make bad decisions. You don't want to like kill anybody or anything like that. Like you could try to do those things, and technically you are, you're sort of cosplaying as a good person, but it is also something that this character has already kind of embodied. And so you are essentially kind of like taking that aspect of that person and, maybe making it more of a significant kind of characteristic, essentially, right? You're sort of you're leaning more towards that side of that person as opposed to the more, evil side, if you know what I mean, right? But that other darker side of them is still a part of them. You just didn't like do those things, but this character already has done those things in the past. So are you a really changed person, or are you just kind of playing a role in a specific way, right? I think, it sounds a little cynical. I do want to give a bit of a, I guess, you know, I guess sort of like a, devil's advocate in the sense where I think I haven't reached the end of the game. I think there is this sort of lingering feeling that there is hope for change for this character. You know what I mean? Despite all of the mistakes that they've made, despite all of like the transgressions that they've made towards other people, especially, there is still potential for change. And I think that's sort of where you come in as the player, to sort of kind of guide them in a certain way, right? I think that there is still that avenue that you could take when you, I guess, continue on with the story. So, yeah, I'm interested in seeing how this kind of progresses. If I don't know if there are like multiple endings to this game. I have no idea how that's going to turn out. I imagine that they are, because there are different decisions that you take, and I think you have choices that you make in regards to certain characters and how you treat them, that could have an effect on where this game ends up. But I think that I'm just interested in seeing how things eventually end up, how this sort of ends. I'm curious if this game is going to provide more of an argument of because overall I think this game is pretty it's pretty bleak, just the way the world building in particular. The writing in this game is excellent. It's so detailed. It's like reading a novel. It really is. So you do have to have a lot of patience. I've noticed this before, but I think if you do want to delve into this game, expect some sort of like a visual novel kind of thing. Albeit probably a bit more interactive. I've never really played a visual novel before, so I can't say, but I imagine this is more interactive in that sense. But you really have to be patient if you want to take some things away from it. Of course, there are manner of ways that you can also play this game. Like you could just kind of speed run through like the main story if you really wanted to like focus in on that, or you could do a bunch of other things. I'm trying to do kind of a healthy dose of both, where I uncover certain things about the world and kind of build out this universe, and also kind of pick up certain bits and pieces that I wouldn't have if I hadn't kind of explored certain areas, which is pretty cool. There is sort of that adventure kind of exploration aspect of this game as well, which I enjoy. It adds a lot of color to the world. I also, I'm interested in, I also like how, your character and the other characters kind of react to discovering parts of the world. I really enjoy that. I think that it's very well done, and if maybe it's something where if I ever wanted to kind of delve back into this game in the future, after I beat it, like maybe later down the line, that I might want to maybe flesh out other parts of the game outside of just kind of the main story. But I think I feel like the main story is honestly the main story plus certain other aspects of the game are really enough to really like hold my attention and hold sort of my enjoyment of the game. I think there's a lot that you can take just from the main story of the game, but there's a lot to really delve into. There's a lot of things in the world that if you don't look into, you might be missing out on some things. You might be missing out on the history of like certain areas and certain characters, and there might be a potential for you to build a relationship with someone. There's that aspect as well. So I think there's a lot of things that I feel add to the game with like the side content and stuff. But I've found sort of the main story itself to be honestly like satisfying enough even without it. Some things that I kind of want to, some other things that I wanted to sort of touch on. This I think is like pretty straightforward. You play a cop. I think there's a lot of like, there's a lot of criticism in regards to people in positions of power. I think that's very clear throughout this game. Criticisms directed at your character in particular, and how them being a cop allows them to essentially get away with a lot of things, and they're despite the countless mistakes that you make as the player, but also what the character has already made, that they're able to continue to kind of succeed in their role as a police officer, as a cop, right? I don't want to give too much away, but as you kind of uncover more about your character, you learn it's like, oh, your character was very well, it was very successful in their role, and essentially was sort of like deemed like almost like a super cop in a lot of ways, and how when you're in a position of power like that, you have the ability to essentially fail upwards, because you are the authority. You are essentially, with your position, you are able to kind of work around the pre-established rules, and you don't have to adhere to them necessarily because you've already established yourself, right? So it's like, despite all of the failings that you may have had, it doesn't really matter. You're good. Like, it doesn't really, you're honestly fine. You can just kind of continue to exist as you are, which I think is very interesting. Like, it doesn't really matter how, like, it really doesn't really matter how you go about things. In this game, it doesn't matter if you take drugs or you beat someone up or whatever. Like, as long as you get to the end goal of solving this murder case, essentially, you're good. You're a good cop, right? So it's like the ends justify the means, if you are kind of in this position. And I think that's a very interesting kind of commentary about police officers and just authority and that sort of thing. One more thing, I think it's really this is one of those aspects where I feel like I just kind of lack a bit of depth, but I wanted to sort of touch upon. There is this historical figure in this game called Dolores Day, and she is called the mother of humanism, and there was like a whole religion and movement that's like dedicated to her after her passing. There's like a location in the game, there's like a church that's like dedicated to her name, and I think it's very interesting. There's a lot with kind of her figure throughout the game, and I don't think I've fully uncovered her significance to the world. But what I've sort of gleaned from it so far is, her essentially the mythos of her persona, if you want to call it that, exceeds the atrocities that she's committed. You know what I mean? To the sense where you look past the factual things that she did to certain people, right? The fact that she was responsible for some forms of like genocide that's kind of touched upon. Like there is this sense of being able to look past these things because her character, her larger than life personality overshadowed those things. It outweighed those things. The way she presented herself, her beauty, I think is like touched upon quite a bit and sort of like emphasized when they like look upon kind of like the glass stained window of her, which I think is very interesting. Very interesting using a real life person as this center head for a figure, right? You could argue there's like kind of, there's the obvious like Jesus illusions. It's like you look past, like, I mean, I feel like with Jesus it's a little different because it's not like I don't believe, I don't maybe I need to do a little bit more research today. I don't believe he committed genocides or anything like that. Like, did he kill anyone? How sure are we of that, right? Like, how historically certain are we of that? Like, but I think the argument there is not necessarily it being like a criticism of Jesus Christ, but like more of a criticism is of how we view religious figures, right? How these are built up to be these mythical personalities when they were actually just in fact just as infallible as the rest of us, right? So I think there is kind of that aspect as well. I think kind of the overall sense that I get from the world in this game is that people are just dealing. They're just surviving. They're just trying their best to do what they can to like survive and kind of essentially reason continuing to exist. I think about the bookkeeper or like the bookstore owner in this case, where she's sort of like struggling to continue to exist as a business because of just like the lack of foot traffic coming to the bookstore and whatnot. And then there's sort of, and the kind of the reasoning is like, oh, this place is cursed, right? This is like the cursed like business sector and whatnot, because it's in this area there's a lot of other failed businesses that have existed in the past, but it's just more like, I think it's just a lot of it is down to how businesses are structured, how there's like there's this element of luck that comes, into play. There's an element of like, it's if like if you're not a profit driven business, like there is the potential for you to bound to fail, and that sort of thing. And how like passions such as like board games and that sort of thing, those things are not profitable because like you're simply doing it for the sake of enjoyment and not necessarily for to generate wealth, right? Like these are all like it's difficult to build a business around like a hobby and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of elements of that this game touches upon, which I think is very interesting. Um, I also want to touch upon every single character I feel in this game that's presented is not stupid. You know what I mean? Like they'll make dumb decisions. They'll make maybe foolish decisions or irrational decisions, but they themselves are not dumb. They have a lot of agency. They are simply trying their best to exist in this world that's been fractured and divided, and that's kind of, the centerpiece of this like island city place where it's sort of separate from other parts of the world, and so these people are just trying their best to do what they can and exist in kind of this world. So the decisions they make, I don't like, while they may be irrational and while the things they say are kind of like ridiculous at times, it's like you also understand where they're coming from based on just the fabric of the world and whatnot. That's just kind of that's another aspect that I think is very that I think is really cool. I also there's a lot to be said about like the Pale, that I struggle to come to terms with it. I think that there's a lot of allusions that you can make to the Pale, this fog kind of thing that exists, that physically exists in the world, but people can't exactly finger point what the heck it is. Like, is it like the physical manifestation of like the divide between classes and the divide between like ethnicities and like nationalities and stuff like that? That's possible. Is it difficult to bridge the gap between people? Is that kind of what the Pale represents? Is it the collective unconscious of sorts that just sort of floats around in the world and is sort of like the manifestation of people's collective minds and ideas and desires and whatnot that just kind of come together, that sort of like just kind of exists there, but it undercuts everybody's ability to be connected in this very fractured world because of how much violence that has existed throughout the years of history and war and all of these other aspects that the damage of humans that they have caused. Is that what the Pale is? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if they're gonna give us. I don't know if I beat the game, they're gonna give us like a clear explanation of what the Pale is. I think they're just gonna leave it that. I think they're gonna leave it to, they're gonna leave it to characters' interpretation of what the Pale is, and they're gonna leave it to the players to determine what the Pale is and why it exists in this particular world of Disco Elysium. Anyways, I think I've said quite a bit about this game. I've enjoyed it quite a lot. There's a lot to take away from it. There's still many, 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 many pieces that I have not uncovered. Again, I don't know if this is something that I would do, but if I do like 100% run in the future where I uncover all the other aspects of the game, I'm sure that I would have like I would probably have more appreciation for other aspects of the game. But I think that I'm leaning towards completing the main mission, the main case of the game, and I'm interested in seeing how that concludes and how that sort of wraps up. So I imagine that I'll be able to beat this sometime this week if I'm able to dedicate a little bit of time to playing this, because I do want to see through the end. I'm also very keen on starting up Baten Kaitos. I'm very excited to play that game, and I kind of want to start that up pretty soon. So that's kind of like another incentive for me to finish Disco Elysium. So yeah, those are my thoughts so far on Disco Elysium. I don't know if I'm going to talk about it more after I beat it. I might have some more thoughts, so stay tuned for that. This week, man, one more thing before we head off, before I close out. There is there's just this sense that there's going to be a direct this week. There is a very clear. There's been a lot of rumors. There's been a lot of rumors and a lot of speculation about there being a direct this week. So I am very interested in seeing if that is true. People are, pointing, to sometime this week. Usually how directs have been announced recently it's like they announce it at least like 24 hours in advance, but it's like very close to when they, actually showcase it. So I'm interested in seeing that. If that does happen, I will obviously be talking about that. So that will be kind of the topic of discussion for next week. Anyways, that is going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you for listening. This has been Save the Semantics, signing off.